He almost walked away before the words were even spoken. His hand was already on the doorknob, knuckles pale, heart pounding with the familiar weight of disappointment and fear. He told himself that leaving was easier than risking the kind of pain he'd already known before: broken promises, half-loves, people who stayed only long enough to open old wounds. Behind him, the house was quiet in the way only heavy emotions make a place quiet. Even laughter from earlier seemed to have sunk into the walls. He took a breath, steady but hurting, convincing himself that this was right, that she would be better without someone who carried so many scars and uncertainties. He had rehearsed the goodbye in his head. It sounded reasonable, almost noble, like he was protecting her from future heartbreak. But beneath all that logic lived fear, the fear of loving again, of being seen, of being needed. He turned the handle, listening to the faint creak of the door, and told himself not to look back, not to think about her smile or the way her eyes softened when she talked about hope after being hurt too many times. He was right there, one step from the outside world, from escape, from loneliness disguised as safety. Behind him she stood frozen, hands wrapped around a coffee cup that had long gone cold. She had felt the distance growing these past days, not loud, not dramatic, but quiet and frightening, like a ship drifting slowly from shore. She had lost before too: love, trust, and the certainty that people stayed. When he said he needed space, she recognized the tremor in his voice, the way people sound when they are already halfway gone. But she didn't run, didn't beg, because she had learned not to chase anyone who wanted to leave. She had a child now, and her life was built around surviving, not clinging. Still, a part of her wished he could see how much courage it took for her to even let him in. She watched him at the door, back tense, shoulders slumped with battles she could not yet fully read, and she whispered in her heart, "If you go, please at least know you were loved here." The words never reached her lips. Fear wrapped them up and kept them quiet. Only the sound of a spoon being set gently on the counter broke the silence, like a tiny, fragile sound in a house full of unspoken things. He saw flashes in his mind of every reason to leave. He remembered promises that had turned into lies, homes that became battlegrounds, people who said forever but meant until it got hard. His heart built walls out of those memories, brick by brick, until even kindness felt dangerous. Being with her felt different, gentler, warmer, like sunlight after years of rain, but sometimes warmth can scare a person more than cold. What if he wasn't enough for her? What if he failed the child? What if history repeated itself and he broke two hearts instead of one? Fear told him he was doing the responsible thing, stepping away before anyone depended on him too deeply. His past whispered cruelly that people like him didn't get happy endings, they only visited them briefly, like tourists, before being thrown back into loneliness. So he tightened his grip on the doorknob, like it was the only solid thing in the world, and prepared to walk out of the life that had just begun to feel like home. Then he heard footsteps, small, hesitant, almost tiptoeing across the floor. The sound alone froze him more effectively than any words. Children have a way of walking straight into the deepest parts of adults' hearts without even meaning to. He closed his eyes, hoping the moment would pass, hoping the child would simply return to his room, unaware of the storm brewing in the hallway. But a tiny hand gently tugged at the hem of his jacket, not demanding, just present, just there. He turned slowly, not trusting his voice, and saw the boy standing there with wide, serious eyes too old for his age, eyes that had already learned what it feels like when people leave. There was no anger on the child's face, only a quiet sadness and a hope so fragile it could break with a breath. In that instant, the man felt every wall inside him tremble. The boy swallowed, as if gathering courage the way soldiers gather shields before a battle. His voice, when it came, was soft, not dramatic, not loud, just painfully honest. "Please don't leave my mom." The words weren't rehearsed, they didn't sound like something taught or manipulated. They were raw truth, spoken by a child who had already watched doors close too many times. The man felt the air rush out of his lungs like he'd been hit. No one had ever asked him to stay like that, not for convenience, not for money, not for appearances, but for love, for stability, for a heart that needed him. The boy's hands were slightly shaking, but he held his gaze bravely, as though he understood that sometimes the simplest words can change the direction of an entire life. He knelt down slowly so he could look the boy in the eyes, and in those eyes he saw mirrored versions of his own childhood, the waiting by windows, the listening for footsteps that never returned, the wondering what made him so easy to leave. He realized that walking away now wouldn't just be about his fear, it would echo into this child's future, confirming the belief that people always go. His throat tightened. He wanted to say he was broken, that he didn't know how to be what they needed, that he was afraid of failing spectacularly. But the child hadn't asked him to be perfect. He had asked him to stay. And sometimes, staying is the greatest bravery a person can offer. Behind them, the mother watched with tears slowly filling her eyes, not because she had asked her son to say anything, she hadn't, but because children see more than adults admit. She hadn't planned to hold on to him. She had promised herself she wouldn't beg anyone to love them, that whoever stayed would do so freely. But hearing her child's voice stripped away all walls she had built around her heart. She felt exposed, vulnerable, trembling between hope and fear. She feared putting pressure on him, feared being the reason he felt trapped. Yet she also knew love sometimes arrives not as grand gestures, but as a moment where someone chooses you when walking away would have been easier. The man stood slowly, heart pounding loud enough he was sure they could hear it. The door remained half open, the cold air from outside brushing his face like a reminder of the loneliness waiting beyond it. He looked from the boy to the woman and realized this wasn't just a crossroads in romance. This was a decision about the kind of man he wanted to be. One path led back to the familiar emptiness he understood. The other led into the unknown, connection, responsibility, vulnerability. He understood that love wasn't about perfection or certainty, it was about showing up, again and again, even when your hands shake. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. He admitted he was scared, that he didn't always know how to stay, that sometimes the urge to run overwhelmed him before he could think. The woman listened, not judging, her tears now quiet companions to the truth unfolding between them. The boy remained close, still clutching his jacket as if physically anchoring him to the room. For the first time, instead of pretending strength, the man allowed himself to be seen in all his brokenness. And strangely, instead of pushing them away, it drew them closer. He closed the door, not dramatically, not with declarations, simply and firmly. The simple click of the latch sounded louder than thunder to them all. It was the sound of a decision being made, of a man turning not away from love but toward it, despite every frightened instinct screaming otherwise. He turned back and pulled the boy into a hug, awkward at first, then tight, then steady. The boy relaxed against him in that instinctive way children do when they finally believe they are safe, and the man felt something inside himself begin to heal. Later, when the boy went back to his room, the two adults sat together in the living room, surrounded by quiet that was no longer heavy but gentle. They didn't make impossible promises. They didn't pretend the road ahead would be smooth. Instead, they spoke honestly about fear, about past wounds, about the responsibility of loving a child as well as each other. And with every word, the man felt the weight on his chest lighten, replaced by something deeper, purpose. Days turned into routines, simple, ordinary miracles. Breakfast shared, school runs, laughter in the kitchen, small arguments, apologies, and the soft peace of knowing someone was there at the end of the day. He learned the boy's favorite stories, the way he liked his sandwich cut, the subtle signals that meant a bad dream had come again. He learned that love often looks ordinary from the outside but feels extraordinary from within. The man also learned that staying is not a single decision but 1,000 small ones, choosing to talk instead of shut down, choosing to listen instead of walk out, choosing to hold a shaking hand instead of pulling away. And every time he chose to stay, the boy's smile grew steadier, the woman's laughter returned a little brighter, and his own heart stitched itself together in ways he hadn't believed possible. One evening, the boy curled up beside him and said, with sleepy certainty, "I knew you wouldn't leave." The man felt tears prick his eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming grace of being trusted. He realized then that sometimes we are sent to heal others, and in doing so, we heal ourselves. He hadn't come to rescue them, they had rescued him from a life spent running from love. He looked at the woman, their fingers intertwined, and silently thanked the moment he almost walked away, because it showed him who he truly was when faced with fear. He understood now that family is not always made by blood, but by the brave decision to stay when it would be easier to leave. And though life would still bring storms, he was no longer the man standing at the door ready to escape. He was the man who stayed.